people a second to see if anybody wants to show up. I will be reading Chapter 3 of the Communist Manifesto, or at least part of Chapter 3. It's broken into multiple parts, so we'll see how far we get tonight. Now I'm going to plug in my computer, because I forgot to do that before I started, and this thing drains it like crazy. And there's nobody here, but that's okay. Yeah, I think I'm just going to start reading. And if people come in, that's great. And if not, oh well. All right. Chapter 3, Socialist and Communist Literature. Should I put in headphones? I'm going to put in headphones. Sorry. For those watching this on YouTube, if anybody does, this is not going to be super interesting because I'm putting in headphones. Oh, you probably can't even hear me now. There we go. Let's make things a little more intimate. All right, here we go. Chapter 3 of the Communist Manifesto, Socialist and Communist Literature. 1. Reactionary Socialism. 1a. Feudal Socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. In the French Revolution of July 1830 and the English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political contest was altogether out of the question. A literary battle alone remained possible. But, even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become possible. Asterisk next to Restoration period, not the English Restoration 1660 to 1689, but the French Restoration 1814 to 1830. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy were obliged to lose sight, apparently, of their own interests and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interests of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by singing lampoons of their new master, and whispering in his ears sinister prophecies of coming catastrophe. In this way rose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half echo of the past, half menace of the future, at times, by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect, through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front of a banner. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coat of arms, and deserted with loud and irreverent laughter. One section of the French Legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle. In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forgot that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different, and that are now antiquated. In showing that under their rule the modern proletariat never existed, they forget that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of their criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amounts to this: that under the bourgeois regime, a class is being developed, which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat, as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join all coercive measures against the working class. In an ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases, they stoop to pick up the golden apples dropped from the tree of industry, and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot sugar, and potato spirits. This applies chiefly to Germany, where the landed aristocracy and squirearchy have large portions of their estates cultivated for their own account by stewards, and are moreover extensive beetroot sugar manufacturers and distillers of potato spirits. The wealthier British aristocracy are, as yet, rather above that, but they too know how to make up for declining rents by lending their names to floaters or more or less shady joint stock companies. Details that about industry that I don't think are incredibly useful today. The lessons maybe, but the specifics of German potato distillers, I don't know how helpful that is. As the person has ever gone hand in hand with the landlord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of these charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heartburnings of the aristocrat. So that's the bit on feudal socialism. Interesting. Excuse me. B. Petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy was not the only class that was ruined by the bourgeoisie, not the only class whose condition of existence pined and perished with the atmosphere of modern bourgeois society. The medieval burgesses and the small peasant proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeois. In those countries which are but little developed, industrially and commercially, these two classes still vegetate side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of petty bourgeois has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition and, as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society to be replaced in manufacture, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. In countries like France, where peasants constitute far more than half the population, it was natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use, in their criticism of the bourgeois regime, the standpoint of the peasants and petty bourgeois. And from the standpoint of these intermediate classes, should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of this school, not only in France but also in England. This school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradictions in the conditions of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved, incontrovertibly, the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labor, the concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction and crises. It pointed out the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasant, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequalities in the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, the dissolution of moral bonds, of the old family relations, of the old nationalities. Wow, it proved a lot. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and of exchange, and with them the old property relations, and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange within the framework of the old property relations that have been, and were bound to be, exploded by those means. In either case, it is both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are corporate guilds for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. Ultimately, when stubborn historical facts have dispersed all intoxicating effects of self-deception, this form of socialism ended in a miserable fit of the blues. Okay, now we're getting to see what Marx calls German or true socialism. The socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of a bourgeoisie in power, and that was the expression of the struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. Sorry, stifled a yawn. German philosophers, would-be philosophers, and beaux esprits eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, this French literature lost all its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. Thus, to the German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the First Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified, in their eyes, the laws of pure will, of will as it was bound to be, the true human will generally, will with a capital W. Sorry. The work of the German literati consisted solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way which a foreign language is appropriated, namely, by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lives of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of economic functions of money, they wrote alienation of humanity. And beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote dethronement of the category of the general, and so forth. The introduction... Sorry, apparently I need to breathe more. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French historical criticisms they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundations of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated. And, since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of truth. Not the interests of the proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, capital M on man, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. Okay. Sorry, I should cover my mouth. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy task so seriously and solemnly, and extolled its poor stock in trade in such mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. The fight of the German, and especially of the Prussian, bourgeoisie against feudal aristocracy and absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement, became more earnest. And it's important to be earnest. Oh, hey, there's a few people in here now. Welcome. Sorry for the yawning. By this, the long-wished-for opportunity was offered to true socialism of confronting the political movement with the socialist demands, of hurling the traditional anathemas against liberalism, against representative government, against bourgeois competition, bourgeois freedom of the press, bourgeois legislation, bourgeois liberty and equality, and of preaching to the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose by this bourgeois movement. German socialism forgot, in the nick of time, that the French criticism, whose silly echo it was, presupposed the existence of modern bourgeois society, with its corresponding economic conditions of existence, and the political constitution adapted thereto, the very things whose attainment was the object of the pending struggle in Germany. To the absolute governments, with their following of parsons, professors, country squires, and officials, is served as a welcome scarecrow against a threatening bourgeoisie. It was a sweet finish after the bitter pills and floggings and bullets with which the same governments, just at that time, dosed the German working class risings. While this true socialism thus served the government as a weapon for the fighting of the German bourgeoisie, it, at the same time, directly represented a reactionary interest, the interest of the German Philistines. In Germany, the petty bourgeois class, a relic of the 16th century, and since then constantly cropping up again under various forms, is the real social basis of the existing state of things. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial and political supremacy of the bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction. On the one hand, from the concentration of capital, on the other, from the rise of the revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. The robe of speculative cobwebs, embroidered with flowers of rhetoric, steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment, this transcendental robe in which the German socialists wrapped their sorry, eternal truths, all skin and bone, served to wonderfully increase the sale of their goods amongst the public. And on its part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling as the bombastic representative of the petty bourgeois Philistine. It proclaimed the German nation to be the model nation, and the German petty Philistine to be the typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model man it gave a hidden, higher socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of its real character. It went to the extreme length of directly opposing the brutally destructive tendency of communism and of proclaiming its supreme and impartial contempt of all class struggles. With very few exceptions, all the so-called socialist and communist publications that now, 1847, circulate in Germany belong to the domain of this foul and enervating literature. So it's like socialism and communism washing, I guess. The revolutionary storm of 1848 swept away this whole shabby tendency and cured its protagonists of the desire to dabble further in socialism. The chief representative and class type of this tendency is Herr Karl Grün. Grün. 2. Conservative or bourgeois socialism. A part of the bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. Okay. I feel like this is like going to be like a liberal and conservative pretending at socialism to keep things the way they are. Let's read on and find out. To this section belong economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of the working class, organizers of charity, members of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, temperance fanatics, hole and corner reformers of every imaginable kind. This form of socialism has, moreover, been worked out into complete systems. All right. So it seems like it's saying that all these things, philanthropy, humanitarianism, people who like fight for funds for causes, excuse me, often do so to make the existing system look better, which is certainly the case. It's the same way like drink manufacturing companies are behind recycling programs. They're trying to make themselves look responsible so people feel better about buying their product and having that exist. Because they know the alternative is to go after the core of what's going on, of the problem, which is their manufacture in the first place, their use at all. So like philanthropists who give a bunch of money to the homeless, often, I mean, I'm sure some of them do it because they can't imagine another system where philanthropy isn't needed because everyone's taken care of. But there are certainly those that do it for tax breaks or to make themselves look good and so they can keep making money, so that the bourgeois can secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. We may cite Proudhon's Proudhon's Philosophie de la Misère as an example of this form. To those in the chat, I am doing this to read it, but also to discuss. If I say something that you disagree with, or something that you you think of like an example like I just did with the plastics or the philanthropists giving to charities, feel free to jump in. And for when this goes up on YouTube, comments below. That's what they're for. Let's talk about this. This isn't propping up an endorsement of the Communist Manifesto. It's a discussion of it. It's a learning process for me too. First time reading it. The socialistic bourgeois want the advantages of modern social conditions without the struggles and dangers necessarily resulting therefrom. They desire the existing state of society minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for bourgeoisie without a proletariat. Impossible. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be the best, and bourgeois socialism develops this comfortable conception into various more or less complete systems. In requiring the proletariat to carry out such a system, and thereby to march straightway into the social New Jerusalem, it but requires in reality that the proletariat should remain within the bounds of existing society, but should cast away all its hateful ideas concerning the bourgeoisie. So yeah, they're trying to convince us that they're good. Do away with this revolutionary nature. A second and more practical but less systematic form of this socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of the working class by showing that no mere political reform, but only a change in the material conditions of existence in economic relations, could be of any advantage to them. By changes in the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeois relation of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution, but administrative reforms based on the continued existence of these relations. Reforms, therefore, that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor, but, at the best, lessen the cost and simplify the administrative work of bourgeois government. Bourgeois socialism attains adequate expression when, and only when, it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade for the benefit of the working class. Protective duties for the benefit of the working class. Prison reform for the benefit of the working class. This is the last word and the only seriously meant word of bourgeois socialism. It is summed up by the phrase, the bourgeois is the bourgeois for the benefit of the working class. That doesn't sound like socialism at all to me. It sounds like faux socialism. It sounds like, I think that's what he's saying, is that it's not socialism. It's like a veneer of socialism to placate to another word I can't think of, the working class. Crap, that's gonna bug me. If anybody thinks of the word I'm thinking of, let me know. 3. Critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not here refer to the literature which, in every great modern revolution, has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writings of Babeuf and others. There's a note there, but I'm not going to read it. If you want to look up Babeuf, Babeuf, you are welcome to do so. Appease? That's a good one. It's not the word it might be the one I'm looking for. I don't know. No, because appease, I feel there's a genuine, they don't actually want to appease them, they want to shut them up, make them not be revolutionary anymore. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in the times of universal excitement, when feudal society was being overthrown, these attempts necessarily failed, owing to the then underdeveloped state of the proletariat, as well as to the absence of the economic conditions for its emancipation, conditions that had yet to be produced, and could be produced by the impending bourgeois epoch alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied these first movements of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism, and social leveling in its crudest form. He likes that word, necessarily. He's very sure of himself, this Mr. Marx. The socialist and communist systems, properly so called, those of Saint-Simon, Fourier, Owen, and others, spring into existence in the early undeveloped period, described above, of the struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. See section 1, Bourgeois and Proletarians. Oh, the word is like on the tip of my tongue. It's thesaurus.com. Placate. Did I say placate? I don't know. That placate might have been the one that I used. Oh, okay. Maybe that was the one I was looking for. The founders of these systems see, indeed, the class antagonisms as well as the action of the decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society. That was a weird reading of that sentence. Okay, well maybe you couldn't find anything because that's the word I was looking for? Maybe. Okay, I'm going to read that again. The founders of these systems see, indeed, the class antagonisms as well as the action of the decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society. The proletariat, as yet in its infancy, offers to them the spectacle of a class without any historical initiative or any independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonism keeps even pace with the development of industry, the economic situation as they find it does not as yet offer them the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore search after a new social science, after new social laws that are to create these conditions. Historical action is to yield to their personal inventive action historically created conditions of emancipation to fantastic ones, and the gradual spontaneous class organization of the proletariat to an organization of society specially contrived by those inventors. Future history resolves itself, in their eyes, into the propaganda and the practical carrying out of their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of caring chiefly for the interests of the working class, as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. So it seems to be a defining feature of the proletariat for the proletariat. Hello, Lupine Luck. Welcome. I'm just in Chapter 3, Part 3, Socialist and Communist Literature. Part 3 being Critical Utopian Socialism and Communism. The underdeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, causes socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the conditions of every member of society, even that of the most favored. Hence, they habitually appeal to society at large, without distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. For how can people, when once they understand their system, fail to see it in the best possible plan of the best possible state of society? Hence, they reject all political, especially all revolutionary, action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, and endeavor by small experiments, necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example to pave the way for the new social gospel. See, that's interesting. There was research done, I don't remember by whom, but I learned about it through Extinction Rebellion, that most successful societal changes came through non-violent action. Such fantastic pictures of future society, painted at a time when the proletariat is still in a very underdeveloped state, and has but a fantastic conception of its own position, correspond with the first instinctive yearnings of that class for a general reconstruction of society. Okay, so this is early socialism, or early proletarian revolutionary thought. But these socialist and communist publications contain also a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are full of the most valuable materials for enlightenment of the working class. The practical measures proposed in them, such as the abolition of the distinction between town and country, of the family, of the carrying on of industries from the account of private individuals, and of the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the functions of the state into mere superintendents of production, all these proposals point solely to the disappearance of class antagonisms which were, at that time, only just cropping up, and which, in these publications, are recognized in their earliest indistinct and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of a purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development. In proportion as the modern class struggle develops and takes definite shape, this fantastic standing apart from the contest, these fantastic attacks on it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. I don't think he means fantastic as in like really good. I think he means fantastic as in like fantasy. I think you probably all understood that, but just want to make sure. Therefore, although their originators of these systems were, in many respects, revolutionary, their disciples have, in every case, formed merely reactionary sects. It was sects with a T, not sex, you pervs. Sects. They hold fast by the original views of their masters in opposition to the progressive historical development of the proletariat. They, therefore, endeavor, and that consistently, to deaden the class struggle and to reconcile the class antagonisms. They still dream of experimental realization of their social utopias, of founding isolated phalanstères, I don't know what that means, of establishing home colonies, of setting up little Icaria, duodecimo editions of the New Jerusalem. And to realize all these castles in the air, they are compelled to appeal to the feelings and purses of the bourgeois. No, not sects. Sects. Although a sext, like, not like a sex text, but like a sex sect, could be interesting. But that's not what this is about. I don't think Marx had any sexts in mind when writing the manifesto. Maybe in his personal life, he had all kinds of sex sects, also known as sexts, in mind, but I don't know anything about Marx personally. By degrees, they sink into the category of the reactionary, conservative socialist depicted above, differing from these only by more systematic pedantry and by their fanatical and superstitious belief in the miraculous effects of their social science. They, therefore, violently oppose all political action on the part of the working class. Such action, according to them, can only result from blind unbelief in the new gospel. The Owenites in England and the Fourierists in France respectively oppose the Chartists and the Réformists. Oh, it explains what phalanstères were. Phalanstères were socialist colonies on the plan of Charles Fourier. Icaria was the name given by Cabet to his utopia and, later on, to his American communist colony. No, not... There, I mispronounced sect with like plural sects. Sects. I missed the T, and so a tangent formed. Yes, that word. Maybe they exchanged sexy telegrams. Maybe they did. They didn't have texts. You can't sext when there's no texts. The Communist Manifesto was not written in the form of sexting, and if it was the worst sexting ever, because this is not sexy. Although, I mean, there are portions early on when it's talking about the failings of capitalism that are a little sexy. Home colonies were what Owen called his communist model societies. Phalanstères was the name of the public palaces planned by Fourier. Fourier, not Fournier. Icaria was the name given to the utopian land of fancy whose communist institutions Cabet portrayed. And that is the end of... You are all just off on your own little tangent, huh? That is the end of chapter 3. Oh, and chapter 4 is only 1 page long. So let's do chapter 4. So it seemed like that one was a warning against both the bourgeois like washings of the class struggle, like philanthropy, good washing, I guess. I don't know what you call it, like greenwashing or like, yeah. And then of like half measures. And I mean, it seems like talking about the bourgeois, or not the bourgeois, the proletariat, who don't want to talk about class. Talking when he talked about the proletariat, that the utopists who want to get where they're going without revolution, as things that just won't work, and why. Yeah. All right, let's do chapter 4. It's only 2 pages long. There are notes that I'm not going to read. Chapter 4 of the Communist Manifesto, the fourth and final chapter. Positions of the Communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. Section 2 has made clear that the relations of the Communists to the existing working class parties, such as the Chartists in England and the agrarian reformers in America. The Communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims, for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class, but in the movement of the present, they also represent and take care of the future of that movement. In France, the Communists ally themselves with the Social Democrats against the conservative and racial bourgeoisie, reserving, however, the right to take up a critical position in regard to phrases and allusions traditionally handed down from the Great Revolution. They found an ancient cuneiform tablet and translated it. It was a breakup letter. Yeah, old-timey, yeah, clearly. Old-timey drama. That was a tangent from the chat. Read it out loud for the YouTube video. I'm trying to read the Communist Manifesto. Fine, I'll read it out loud for the YouTube video. Coyote Trickster 23 says, they found an ancient cuneiform tablet that translated it, and it was essentially a breakup letter. Hey, found out from so-and-so that you've been sleeping with this other person. You're garbage. You have until the end of the lunar cycle to collect your linens and sandals. After that, they will be donated to the Temple of the Moon. There you go. In Switzerland, they support the radicals, without losing sight of the fact that the party consists of antagonistic elements, partly of democratic socialists, in the French sense, partly of radical bourgeois. In Poland, they support the party that insists on an agrarian revolution as the prime condition for national emancipation, that party which fomented the insurrection of Krakow in 1846. In Germany, they fight with the bourgeoisie whenever it acts in a revolutionary way, against the absolute monarchy, the feudal squirearchy, and the petty bourgeoisie. Last page. But they never cease, for a single instant, to instill into the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, in order that the German workers may straightway use, as so many weapons against the bourgeoisie, the social and political conditions that the bourgeoisie must necessarily introduce along with its supremacy, and in order that, after the fall of the reactionary classes in Germany, the fight against the bourgeoisie itself may immediately begin. The Communists turn their attention chiefly to Germany, because that country is on the eve of a bourgeois revolution that is bound to be carried out under more advanced conditions of European civilization, and with a much more developed proletariat than that of England was in the 17th and France in the 18th century, and because the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be but the prelude to an immediate following proletariat revolution. Marx was optimistic. In short, the Communists everywhere support every revolutionary moment against the existing social and political order of things. In all these movements, they bring to the front, as the leading question in each, the property question, no matter what its degree of development at the time. Finally, they labor everywhere for the union and agreement of the democratic parties of all countries. The Communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at the communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. Working men of all countries, unite. It's an interesting ending to the manifesto. Unless I'm misremembering, it doesn't really talk about women except as something to be gained or lost. Although it does talk about women as something to be gained or lost from a bourgeois perspective. So it doesn't really talk about women at all from a communist perspective. I think Marx would, from having read this, he would say that women are included, and it's just a language thing talking about working men of all classes, and it's all he and him. But I think we've learned since that that makes a difference. And I could be wrong, of course. This is my interpretation of the manifesto. And then there's the working men of all countries unite, meaning, which begs the question, if you can't work, or if there isn't any work for you, especially with, I mean, we are at a far more advanced state of automation in the workforce in our society than they were at this point. What happens when there isn't enough work for everyone? I don't remember any mention of that kind of thing. It seems like everyone should get what they work for. Is kind of the cry of the communists. I will have to go back and re-watch my own reading of chapter 2, because, not gonna lie, I was pretty high for that one, so I don't remember it very well. I'll probably actually go back and rewatch all of them, just to better comprehend the manifesto, and maybe put together some of my own thoughts, and do one more stream of my thoughts and conversation. But unless anybody has anything they want to share, thoughts, ideas, anything like that, I think that is the end of this stream, and thus the end of the reading of the Communist Manifesto. This will go up on YouTube sometime soon. And if anyone, excuse me, and I would like to read something else next, something important, something that's going to help push thought on how society can be. Like, what should we replace capitalism with? Communism seems like a good option. I think it needs some evolution from Marx's communism, because it does come from a pretty, my reading of it anyways, is that it comes from a pretty colonialist and patriarchal point of view, and so doesn't include everyone. Although, I mean, he does talk about how it's about working with everyone. What was it we just saw in this last chapter? Working with everyone for the downfall of the bourgeoisie. So all the parties, the agrarian parties and all that, the communists would support them, to emancipate them, to emancipate everyone from the bourgeoisie. So I feel like Marx would probably be on board with Black Lives Matter, and with, like, missing and murdered Indigenous women movements to, I mean, stop it and achieve justice for those that have gone missing and been murdered. I don't know how much he would be for it for its own sake, But how much does that matter if he's for it? If Marx were leading the Communist Party here today, and threw the weight of the Communist Party, or whatever it would be under him, behind stopping Line 3, for example, and stopping, is it Trans Mountain in BC? Yeah, I think it's Trans Mountain. Whether it's for the sake of indigenous people or not, or whether it's for the sake of environmentalism, or whether it's for the sake of overthrowing the bourgeoisie, if he throws his weight behind them, his weight is behind them. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's that simple. I mean, I think it does matter, but I don't think it's a case of, for me anyways, being a admittedly white guy who has never experienced racism, systematic or not, or anyone trying to take my land, because I'm descended of people who took land. My land would be over in Europe. But yeah, I think take the help and have the conversation and come together and realize that it's the same fight. The fight against the bourgeoisie and the fight against desecration of indigenous lands and destruction of indigenous peoples and the destruction of the environment and the climate crisis. I mean, it's all the same fight. We're fighting against the same people for the same goal. I just wonder how much people realize that, and wish people would realize it more. Anyways, I'm not reading anymore. Now I'm just talking into the void. Oh, I got messages. And now I will conclude this stream with an interpretive dance portraying the Communist Manifesto. I will not, Telaka. I'm not a dancer. A movement piece, maybe, with some mime and stylized. I don't know. I'm not going to do that. But it's interesting. I might direct something like that, but with an actual dancer. Coyote Trickster says, the indigenous peoples, as I understand, didn't have a concept of land ownership. So this is everyone's land, same as the air is everyone's air and the rain is everyone's rain. Yeah, and I think that would go very well with the manifesto, because it's the state, I guess, from what I understand, the state owns the land, which is like everyone and no one owning the land, and the air and the rain. So yeah, from what I understand, and I mean, this is what I thought when I first started, the Communist Manifesto and indigenous teachings. Yeah, when colonizers created treaties, they didn't understand exactly what they meant. The they, if I'm reading it right, being that the indigenous people didn't understand exactly what the colonizers meant, because they didn't, I mean, and I agree with it, that the concept of owning land is absurd. Like, who are you to claim land and say no one else can have it? I don't mean you specifically, I mean anyone. Like, if you're living on it and that's the space that you're currently taking up, and it's not an inordinate amount of space, then you respect that. that doesn't mean it's the person's land. Exactly. No one talks about owning the air. Why is it so different for land? Although, give fucking capitalists time and they'll try and own the air. And I mean, owning the rain they're working on with water, commodifying it for bottled water industries and excuse me, selling things with water in them. Yeah, it's they will commodify everything they can. And land is something that they've commodified so thoroughly that no one thinks twice about the concept of owning land. It's just what you do. And like, I intend to own property again someday because you have to live in the system you're in. But if someone were like, yeah, everyone gives up their land, you don't own the land, you're welcome to live on it, I'd be among the first to line up to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't know. Owning land is absurd. Let's leave it at that. Especially when you can say, let's leave it at that and continue. Especially under capitalism, when land can be bought, you can buy as much as you want as long as you have the money for it. And then you need, the more land you have, the more money you can make. So, like, capitalism is a system that is designed to funnel everything to the top. So people talk about, oh, communism's bad because look at how it's worked out this way and look how it's worked out that way in the past. But that's the corruption of communism. Whereas you don't need to corrupt capitalism for it to be bad. It's designed that way. Like camping, or close to it, in the current system. You have a site that you're on, that's your space, but you don't own it. Yeah. Yeah, yes, I think that's the closest you can get to it in the current system, but I don't think you can... There isn't an approximation in the current system because the current system is based on ownership. Like, that is the whole point of capitalism, is you own things. You get money to own things, and then they're yours, and it doesn't matter who it hurts that you own them. They're yours, and that's right under capitalism. You can buy land with as much forest on it as much forested land as you want. You can do whatever you want with that land because you own it. So, I mean, in a way, that kind of is owning air, because if you own a huge crop of land or a huge plot of land that is forested, you're creating a lot of air, and it's up to you whether you want that carbon to continue to be sequestered and you want those trees to continue to produce oxygen. And sadly, under capitalism, the majority of people who do get to that level of wealth where they can buy enough land to make a difference use that land to make more money at the expense of the environment. And not just the environment, but the expense of those working the land and those living on the land. And like, it's kind of sad that there was that, I think, Swedish millionaire who bought like $14 million, like a plot of land, a plot of rainforest for $14 million for the sole purpose of leaving it as it is, leaving it as rainforest. And we look at that and we go, oh my God, such an amazing guy. And that's what we should be doing with rainforest everywhere. Like, yeah, it's ridiculous that saving rainforest is this like great thing that we're all surprised that a guy spent his money to save the world. I mean, do his part to save the world. Coyote Trickster says, capitalism also enjoys depleting resources as a way of controlling the supply, which leads to demand. Absolutely. The law of supply and demand is ridiculous too. If you can create scarcity, you can raise the prices, like, even if it doesn't cost you any more to make it, or it doesn't cost you any more time, it doesn't take you any more time to make it. Modern pricing it benefits the rich, as everything does in our system. But I think that's enough ranting about capitalism. Unless more people want to chime in, I'm happy to discuss. I'm going to sign off. I'm open to suggestions as to what to read next. You can do so on my Instagram, at Rayactor. It's the same handle as on here. There's also my company's Instagram, Rose Colored Apocalypse, which you'll see the logo with the biohazard with the rose in front. On Instagram, it's just at Rose Colored Apocalypse. Colored with a U because I'm Canadian. And yeah, we'll figure out which society-changing, bourgeoisie-smashing text we can read next. Preferably by an Indigenous person, I think. I don't know if I'm still on the fence about, like, me, a white guy, reading and criticizing text written by Indigenous people or people of color. But I also, like, don't want to just promote old dead white guys. So I'm open to conversation, and I'm more than open to. I'm encourage people to reach out and tell me what they think about that, because I am not super decided. But yes, thank you for the heart, Coyote Trickster. Heart back. I am going to sign off now. Thank you for listening to me read and rant, everyone. Have a good night.